Hey, my name's Matt, and we're making a new Paludarium for my baby vampire crabs. This tank's a 20-gallon long. It's actually an old tank that we had gerbils in for 4 to 5 years. We actually had a topper for the gerbil tank, and you can see that they chewed up most of the rim of the glass. They also scratched up a lot of the silicone on the side of the glass. A lot of these cheaper tanks use way too much silicone. After doing some testing, there still seems to be enough silicone to keep water in the tank. This tank is going to be replacing the television in our bedroom. We've had the baby vampire crabs in a tank in our bedroom for quite a while now, and we spend way more time looking at the baby vampire crabs than we do actually watching TV. So I think having a larger tank in the bedroom would be nice. That way we can relax and watch them explore and grow in the tank. The baby crabs are growing fast, and I had to make this tank pretty fast as well. I started by removing the TV and anything we didn't need on the dresser. This is a pretty long tank, so I'm going to separate out the left and right side into two little island sections, with a smaller land section connecting the two. I think the baby crabs do like the water flow in the other tank, so I'll be adding a pump to this one. The islands on either side will be separated out into two tiers. The rocks I'm using will also create a lot of crevices. I'm hoping this will reduce the aggression by just letting the smaller crabs or baby crabs hide into the crevices. We'll start out the scape by just placing some foam mats onto the bottom of the glass. I like to do this whenever I'm placing larger rocks or stacking a bunch of rocks on top of each other. This will help just distribute the weight across the surface area of the glass and make sure there's no pressure point that will cause the glass to crack. And this just helps ensure that we don't have any problems later on in the future. Once I have the foam in a general area, I want to place the rocks. We can start hardscaping. The rocks I'm using are just some quarry rocks you can get at any landscape supply store. I've found that there's no big reason to use aquascaping stones, and you can oftentimes create something that looks pretty cool with these quarry stones. It's a good thing to test these stones before you put them in any tank. Some stones you get can increase the hardness. For me, that's not really an issue because my tap water is really soft, and after testing these rocks, I don't think they're going to leach anything into the water anyways. Spent a lot of time placing the stones, making sure they fit well, making sure they interlocked well naturally on their own. And then once those were all set up and done, I glued the stones together with just some cotton pads and super glue. Once that first layer was done, I went on to the other side of the tank and started that section. That way the other side has some time to dry. The opposite section is just a little smaller than the other section. This is just keeping to an aquascaping composition concept where you don't want an even size on the left and right side. Usually you want one side to be just a little larger than the other side. In most cases that makes everything look more natural. With the other side, I did the same thing with the foam on the bottom of the glass, stacking the rocks the same way, making sure that they interlocked well together. I also wanted to make sure that the rocks didn't all face one direction. I wanted this tank to look a little more wild, a little more aggressive, and a little more interesting. And one thing to do that was just to make the rocks all face different directions. I also try to make interesting shapes with the rocks when I could, and I do that by creating small points of interest. Some areas created a V shape, others had just rocks jetting out in an opposite direction, and then some other rocks created a ledge. Once again, when that first layer was done, I glued everything together, and then I was able to move back to the other side since that gluing process was done. And for this first land section, I'm going to be trying something new. I'm just going to use Aquasoil as the first land section. Hopefully this makes sure my water parameters don't go too crazy while still giving the surface level plants some nutrients to grow. I still put down a layer of lava rocks to separate the aquasoil from the water as much as I could, but instead of putting a barrier layer like cotton, fabric, or weed guard, I just poured the aquasoil right on top. I'm hoping the aquasoil will also leach a little bit of nutrients into the water column because I'm going to be using just bare sand for the water section. Hopefully the aquasoil will leach just enough nutrients to fertilize the moss and other plants I'll have in the water section. Once that was done, I did the same thing to the other side, putting the lava rocks down, then the aquasoil on top. And then it was time to do the second layer. Try to keep about 1 inch to 2 inches of land on the first layer I did. That way any baby vampire crabs still had room to dig the burrows they like to dig, while also leaving enough room for the second layer. And for the second layer, I did the exact same thing with the rocks, just keeping in mind that I did want that middle section. I also had to keep in mind that the second layer will have soil in it, and I really try to make sure that the rocks didn't have any gaps for the soil to leak through. Once the second layer was done, I put some felt sheet down as a barrier layer. You can get felt sheet at any craft store or just any general purpose store. And when you cut the sheet, you really want to make sure that it's larger than the area it's going to be filling. That way the edges fold up, creating a cup shape. This will just make sure that the soil doesn't sneak its way through between the felt sheet and the glass of the tank. It also makes sure that the soil doesn't fall through any cracks in the rock section you've made. For this build, I'm doing a mix of 1/3 earthworm casting and 2/3 organic potting soil. This seems to be a good combination for the plants, and also makes the soil rigid enough for the vampire crabs to dig holes into. Once that was done, I filled up the tank with water, Something I did mention before was that I made sure to have the first layer tall enough and have a deep enough lava rock section. For this tank, the water level will be going up and down just due to evaporation. And like I said, I did want the Aquasoil touching the water just a little bit, so I didn't have to be too precise about it. But if you're making your own tank and you're using normal soil, you want to make sure you have about an inch of separation between the water level and the soil section. And I filled the tank with water before I put in the pump and the middle section in, because I have trouble building the pump section unless I have water in the tank. This just gives me an idea of how much water I'll be working with and helps me figure out how I want to set up the pump. And since this tank's going to be in our bedroom, I really want to make sure there's no pump noise. So I wanted to make sure there was enough room to put foam around the entire water pump. That way the pump wouldn't be vibrating against the glass, creating a drum. The foam will also act as a filter for any larger debris. It'll also help prevent any baby vampire crabs from working their way to the water pump. Once I got the pump in place, I made sure that the rocks stacked up nicely, also making sure that I could put a capping rock on top of the pump when I was done. That way I had easy access to the pump for maintenance. I then glued the rocks together in place, put a barrier layer on top, and then that rock on top to hide the barrier layer. For this build, I'm using some older carpet moss. It's springtime here, so the carpet moss is looking a little worse for wear, but that's okay. Vampire crabs often eat moss anyways, so I'm expecting to replace this moss over time. I'll also have this moss touching the water section. I'm hoping this will just wick water up towards the rest of the moss, and hopefully it'll reduce the amount of spraying and watering of the plants. For the left side of the tank, I'll be using some asparagus fern. To me, these look like little trees, and I think they help create a sense of scale really well. I'll also be using some red nerve plants, and I'll be using a vining plant my wife's been growing for a while now. To be honest, I don't know what it's called. If anybody does know, let me know. I'm hoping over time the plant will cascade down the second and first layer of rocks and then eventually reach the water column. On the opposite side, I'm going to be putting a begonia that looks pretty crazy. This plant has larger leaves, and I found a lot of the crabs like to perch on top of large plants. I'll also be using a purple passion plant on this side. Hopefully these larger leaf plants will give the vampire crabs the perching space they like, and the smaller plants of the opposite area will give them the hiding room that they like. I'm also hoping the larger leaves of this section will balance out the tank, since this is the smaller land section. And for the middle section, I'm just using a wild assortment of mosses that I have. This section's a lot smaller, and I just wanted to keep it open to act as a bridge between the left and right side. I'm also expecting to feed the crabs a lot more in this middle section, and having it open just makes that a lot easier. For the water section, I'm just going to be placing some Anubias Nana Petite and some Physidens moss I've just had lying around. For the Physidens moss, I'm trying something new and just placing it within the sand. I saw someone do this with the flame moss on green aqua and wanted to give it a try. For this build, the sand I'm using is just pool filter sand. This is a rather large tank with a larger water area, and a 50-pound bag of pool filter sand costs about 20 bucks. If I try to get the same amount of aquarium sand, it'll probably cost me over $100. So that'll save me some money for some other builds, and I actually think the pool filter sand looks pretty nice. And pool filter sand's actually pretty clean, so you don't need to clean it out too much before you add it to the tank, so that's a bonus. Once most of the planting was done, I just added some other mosses to break up the carpet moss we had. I took some star moss I've been growing and just placed it in some sections that would poke out of the rocks. And that's it, that's the entire build. The lid I'm using for this tank is just a metal sheet lid you can get at any pet store. I'll probably be adding a layer of glass or plastic underneath it just to keep the humidity up. And the light I'll be using is just a 6500 Kelvin shop light. None of the plants we're using are very demanding, and we're not trying to grow too many plants within the water section, so this shop light will work just fine. So it's been about 2 weeks now since I set up the tank. I was hoping to get the vampire crabs in by now, but to be honest, I'm having a lot of nitrite issues. The same nitrite issues I've been having with the other tanks I've set up with the ADA Aquasoil. I feel like ADA Aquasoil is really optimized to give the plants as much nutrients as they need to grow with CO2 injection. But if you're setting up a low-tech tank and not injecting CO2, then using ADA Aquasoil is probably not a good idea. Probably best to use some of the more basic Aquasoils like Fluval. I used to use Fluval all the time, and I think it's still my favorite Aquasoil to use. And I feel like it releases just enough nutrients for a low-tech tank. If I do a build like this again and use Aquasoil as part of the land section, I'll probably end up using a more basic Aquasoil like Fluval or Aqueon. They really aren't as good as the ADA Aquasoil, but sometimes that can be a good thing. Hopefully the tank's ready soon because these crabs are getting way too big. If you have any ideas on how to transfer the crabs from their small tank to this larger tank, let me know. Once again, if you want to follow up on this tank, subscribe to the channel because I'll have it coming up in the future. That's it. Thanks for watching, guys. Keep scaping. Bye.